So I am here with author Natasha Lane. Welcome, Natasha.
Hi, everyone.
I'm so excited to hear you or talk to you today because it has been several years since we met up at KenCon and we bonded over our joint indie authorship. So give me all your updates.
Yeah, it has been several years. And of course, in those several years, a lot has happened, just a few small things, no big deal, right? So since we last spoke, I've definitely made a shift in my writing. I believe last time we spoke, I was still kind of dabbling in romance. And now I've really shifted from romance to science fiction and fantasy. There are still some romantic elements in my stories. And I have considered going back to romance, but primarily now I am focusing on like science fiction and fantasy. So that's been a huge shift for me. I've also grown, I think, as an indie author. When you and I met, I probably had been an indie author for like 2 or 3 years only. But now it's about like five or six, somewhere around there, that I've been like doing the indie author thing. And I have to say, it's been quite the journey. So yeah, a lot has changed.
Yeah, I think we must have started publishing about the same time because I published my first book in 2015. So I was, well, maybe 4 years in by that point. But yeah, so maybe around the same time. And it is definitely a journey, and you learn things and your writing evolves, and what you realize you love doing evolves as well. So
yeah, definitely agree.
So do you want to jump in and tell us about, I don't know where you want to start, if you want to start here and go back, or start at the beginning and go forward? Maybe at the beginning and go forward, because I think you have a new release. So I'd love to hear about that last, so it sticks in our minds.
So sorry, what's the question?
Oh, sorry. So I was going to say, do you want to start at the beginning of your books and go forward? But then I decided, yes, that's the best thing, because I want to have your new release sticking in our minds.
Yeah, no, definitely. So when I can give some background on me too. So I got involved in publishing in like 2013, but this is back when I was traditionally published, and I was writing solely romance novels at that time. Around like 2015 or 2016, I left my publisher and I decided I want to really explore fantasy and sci-fi, because fantasy has always been a genre since I was young that has been close to my heart. So around 2015, 2016, I left my publisher. I was working on this novel that I had under my belt for several years. It was and it's the first novel I released as an indie author, which is The Pariah Child and the Ever-Giving Stone. So I had that under my belt for years and years. I actually wrote it when I was like in middle school as a little thing. Yeah, a little thing I would work on. And then in college, I was kind of like, let me just pull that back out. Like, let's see what's happening there. Of course, I was not as great a writer when I was like 13, compared to like an adult. So there was a lot of editing that had to be done, but I never forgot about that manuscript. And I was just like, I want to get it published one day. And so in it was like 2017, 2018, somewhere around there, I'm guesstimating here, but 2017, 2018, I finally got that book published. And it was like, that feeling when you publish your first book, it's a very unique feeling, particularly as an indie author, because you think to yourself, like, I did everything for this book. I found the cover artists, I found the editors, I found the proofreaders, I read it multiple times to make sure that it was going the way, the story was flowing the way I want to, that the characters were being represented a certain way. You do the formatting, you find someone to do the formatting. I did all the research. So it was a very fulfilling moment when I published The Pariah Child and the Ever-Giving Stone. From there, I would go on to publish 3 more books in that series. And now I've left that series and I am focusing on my sci-fi time travel series, which is the first book in the series is called Involuntary Time Traveler. And the second book that is releasing next month is Unexpected Warrior. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
This sounds super cool. And the first fantasy series, is that a complete series?
Yeah, that's it. I considered adding more to it, but after some thoughts, I was just like, you know what? I think it's time to like let this one go, move on, because I felt I had matured as a writer, and I still love the characters and I love the world, right? But I wrote the first book when I was like 13. So like it was kind of going from like young little girl Tasha with her all these fantastical things and blah 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 to more like kind of grown woman, mature young woman, Natasha. And I think the shift in my writing style and the things I want to write about, and also honestly the age of my characters too, shows that shift. So yeah, it was time to let it go.
And can you tell us a brief overview of that fantasy series? And it sounds like a YA fantasy, correct?
Yeah, it was young adult. So the brief overview is okay, let's see. This is the part that makes authors nervous. But I've been in this industry for years, I can do this. Okay. So the first book starts off with our main character, Seraphina, and the backstory of her is essentially Seraphina just like hear and see things that other people can't. And her mom has always kind of like been a harsh disciplinary when it comes to her imagination, telling her she needs to be more grounded in everything. But what Sarah will eventually come to realize is that the things that she thinks that her mother tells her, just her imagination, are actually magical creatures. And for a while, she manages to kind of close them out. But then when she's 13, she's attacked by this wolf who, as I describe it, has poisonous black fur. And she realized it. And then later on that same day, magical creatures essentially appear to her and they tell her, we need you to come back to our magical world to help us save it. So she eventually goes back to the magical world. Things happen, lots of battles, dragons, vampires, dwarves, all those sorts of things. So the first two books really focus on Seraphina and her growing from a 13-year-old in the first book to a 15-year-old. So kind of like, the awkward teen phases and having crushes on people. And then like, oh, do they like things like that? And also her like loving and accepting herself, because there's this constant tension between her and her mother. And then in the third book, it shifts to some other side characters. Sorry, the third and the fourth book, it shifts to other side characters and their stories and their journey in the world. So the entire series, like I said, the entire fantasy series primarily takes place in the magical world. And as you read through it, you're going to see the world develop. So you'll see, like in the first book, where the world was, and then you'll see like technology grows and changes, and there are more cities, and they're becoming more industrial by the fourth book. So things like that. Yeah.
Interesting. That sounds super cool.
Thank you.
And tell us the name of that series so we can make sure we can remember it.
Yeah, so it's the Pariah Child series. The first book in the series is actually free to download on Apple Books, Amazon, Barnes Nobles, and Kobo. I think I remembered everyone. Yeah. So the first book in the series is free to download. So, go check it out.
Awesome. That sounds super fun for those lovers of YA fantasy. And you hit, my voice is being weird today. You hit all the major like fun fantasy characters, vampires, dwarves, elves.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything anyone would like. Very cool. So tell us about your sci-fi then.
Yeah. So I really, really, really love this series. And I'm in this weird, I'm like a plotter. So I'm in this weird phase where I'm like, well, how long do I want this series to be actually, because I think as an author, and you'll probably understand this too, when you really love a series and really love like the characters in the world, sometimes you just don't want to stop. You could carry on the series for years and years and years. Anyway, so my sci-fi series is the Keanu Morgan series. And it focuses around a character, Keanu, who lives in Baltimore City, which is my hometown. And it takes place in a world where magic is the norm. People, like almost everyone has magic. It's used throughout the day. People use it to like charge their cars. It's just the norm there. And what ends up happening is one day Keanu is coming home from after going out with some friends. She's a grad student. After going out with some friends, she comes home and she notices that her little sister is in the attic and she's struggling with a high school project. So Keanu, wanting to be a helpful big sister, decides, you know what, I'm going to help my little sister. Let me, help her with this casting circle and everything. Sadly, what ends up happening is her younger sister ends up sending her back in time. And so she gets stuck in like, the term isn't like a time loop, but she essentially gets stuck in the first book in the French Revolution. And so she's pulled back to the French Revolution and she meets the Marquis de Lafayette, who, if you're a bit of a history buff or you watched Liberty Kids when you were younger, the Marquis de Lafayette was a significant figure in the Revolutionary War. He actually helped convince France to help America fight the war. So she meets him and it's about her trying to, one, survive the French Revolution, She's also a black character. She's a black woman. So at that time, there were not a lot of black people in France, as you can imagine. And the ones that were, they were like servants or slaves. So then it also deals with that sort of historical element as well. And as she's going through the French Revolution and she's learning more about what happened there, and she's having these experiences, what's going to happen to Keanu throughout the series is she's kind of randomly pulled into other time periods. It's going to be explained in like the third or fourth book as to why the spell was so messed up that it actually pulled her away. But at the by the end of the first book, she's pulled into another time period, and so she goes from 18th century France, which is during the French Revolution, to 17th century Angola, which is a country in Western Africa. So yeah.
That sounds super rich and super amazing. Seems like it would be a lot of fun to research all of that.
Yeah, so
are you a history buff? Are you a history teacher? Or
so that's the funny thing. I like learning for the sake of learning, but when I have to like research something for a book, I start getting very like, oh God, like I don't. It's a bad habit of mine, and I'm really excited for the third book in the series because, well, actually, I don't want to spoil anything, but long story short, I don't really enjoy research. I enjoy research if I can just do it for fun, but when I have to do it for like a book or work, it's like, okay, great, perfect. But it was, I will admit, it was interesting learning about these different time periods. Like I knew a little bit about the French Revolution, but having to do a lot of research on like being Black during that time was really interesting. And I think learning more about the Marquis de Lafayette was also really interesting because I knew him from Liberty Kids and I knew him also from Hamilton, if you watch the musical Hamilton, but I didn't know a lot about like his life, how some of his social and political views developed. So I thought that was really interesting.
That's really cool. Yeah, I did a historical fantasy starting in like the mid 1400s, and it goes all the way up to 2000. So I researched different things, but I, like you, I didn't want to get too nitty gritty. Like when I started getting too nitty gritty, I was like, no, that's not that fun. So I put places and dates and things like that and throw them in there. And then I'm like, okay, let's go back to the fantasy part of it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think for people who consistently write historical fiction, whether it's historical romance or just maybe something, I don't know what other, but if it's historical romance or something else, I think some people are more accepting of like, oh, they messed up this like historical fact, that's fine. And then other people are like, you messed this up, this is not accurate. I remember one author, there was a scene in their book where it was about farming, and they were just the main character lived in a farm, so they were talking about the farm, and they basically they mentioned some of the vegetables that the character was growing, and someone like left a review saying like that is not native to that country, so like there's no way this character, and like the person was kind of like, that's what that's what you picked up on. So some people are very picky about it, and then other people aren't, from what I've seen so far. So far, everything I've heard about my book, my first book in my time travel series, I haven't done anything that was so horribly historically inaccurate that someone has called me out. So I feel good so far. All that research came in handy.
Yeah, I am with you on that one, because just like you said, as fulfilling as releasing a book is, it's horrifying as well, because you're like, okay, I didn't do anything wrong, did I?
Yeah. You're like, you're like, am I going to make someone angry? Is this part not good enough? So yeah, totally understand.
Yeah, after I released my Fae book, I didn't do any research on Fae before I wrote it. And then after I released it, I started doing some research, and I was like, oh my goodness, my Fae are like totally wrong. And I'm like, okay,
yeah,
we'll see if anybody hates me now.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's an adult character. Would you classify it as an adult book then?
I would call it new adult, only because she's a grad student, and I also write her a little young intentionally. Like oh my gosh, I'm forgetting her age. she's a grad student, so she's like 23, I believe is how old I made Kiana in the book. But I write her as a bit more immature, and I do that intentionally because I want people to be able to see her growth through the series. And so I would classify it as a new adult novel. Yeah.
Okay. Fun. New adult sci-fi fantasy. And what is the name of the series?
Yeah, so it's called the Keanu Morgan series. The first book is Involuntary Time Traveler. And the next book that's coming out, the second book that's coming out February 24th is Unexpected Warrior. Yeah.
Unexpected Warrior. That sounds so awesome. I'm going to pick up that first time traveler book because that sounds like something that right up my alley.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited.
How did you come up with the idea?
So, it's really funny. When I knew I was ending my first series, I was like, what am I going to do next? I have, like many authors, I have an entire document of just like ideas. So I was like, go back to the document. Like, don't try to come with something new, just go back to the document and see what sticks out to you. So I went back and I was like, oh, I really like this idea when I first had it. But the description of the story was like one line because all I had in my head at the time was the scene of like a young witch and she like falling down a tunnel. And I don't really know where I got the like scene from, but it kind of just like played in my head. And I was like, oh, I would like to do something with that imagery. And then I actually sat down with some friends one night and I was like, let's watch Hamilton. Hamilton, I think like the musical, I think it released like 2017. I was one of those people that like, I just took my time. I was like, I'm not rushing to go see. I've heard, some people love it, some people hate it. I understand both sides of the argument, but I decided it's on Disney Plus. We have Disney Plus. Let's sit down and watch it. And as I was watching Hamilton, there is a scene where the Marquis de Lafayette comes onto stage. And I don't know if you've seen it, but
I have to admit, I'm probably one of the only people who hasn't seen it at all.
No worries. There's this part where the Marquis de Lafayette, where he's like kind of introduced and he comes on stage and he has a part of the song where he's just like rapping, and he's basically like, I'm the Marquis de la, and a few other things. So anyway, his entrance reminded me of a few things. Like one, it reminded me of like, oh, the Marquis de Lafayette, that guy from Liberty Kids, which is the show I used to watch when I was a kid. Two, I love the interest. Like I love how the actor portrayed the Marquis. And so it got me kind of interested. And I was like, what if her falling down that tunnel is a time tunnel? And I was like, and what if the time tunnel drops her into the French Revolution? And that's when I was like, oh, I was like, I could do that. And so that's how I got the idea for the first book.
Very cool. And that seems like, it could be a never ending series because you can constantly drop into different time periods and have them have those challenges in those time periods, and then whoops, they're sucked away. So
exactly. So that, and like I said, I'm a plotter, so part of me is like, just after 4 books, Tasha, just end it. But then another part of me is like, well, we could stretch it to 6. Like, there are a lot of options.
Well, it's so funny because I was thinking about that same thing because I just released book 2 of the Stay series, and then I already had book 3 plotted out, and then I was like, okay, because my last series was 4 books, and so I kind of had it in my mind it was going to be 4 books again, and then I was like, wait, if I killed this person, it could go on to be a 5th book, and then I'm like, oh, that's really mean.
Yeah.
I went really dark with that one. So
sacrifice for the series.
Sacrifice for the greater good, and yeah. Hopefully my listeners aren't listening to this, but they don't know who's going to get killed. So yeah. Very fun. And you said at least 3 to 4 books, so people can look forward to that one. And your other fantasy series is a complete series, and that's also a lot of readers want like that finished so they can like just binge read.
Yeah, so they can run through it. Yeah, and I completely understand that too. Just being able to like get one book you like the series and then just go through I've also been that person. I could just like destroy an entire series. Like, this is where I'm going to spend my weekend. This is what I want to be doing. So yeah.
Yes, definitely. Well, tell our listeners where we can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Natasha D Lane Writes. I post a lot of like updates about books, but also just like random things. Like if I go on a nice hike or I'm cooking something as well. You can find me on Twitter at Natasha_Lane1. And of course, I'll give you all these links too, but my website is NatashaDLaneWrites.com. So those are all the places you can find me. I post a lot of reels too. So if you like Insta reels, I'm a great person to follow for that.
Well, I follow you and I love all your content, so I think everyone will.
Thank you.
Well, and thanks again for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And congrats on your new release. You can pick it up on February 24th. So on
Yes.
2022. That's super fun.
Yes, thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.